Nolan's Odyssey, The Gift That Keeps Giving. There's some nice new developments in that front that I think are pretty hilarious, and I probably would want to make a video on those, but I think it actually gives more fuel for me to actually continue down this path of doing the series, The Real Odyssey. So yeah, let's get right to it. I'm going to continue now of the last two videos that I made. The first one is Who is Penelope, and it's pretty much the backstory of the Odyssey. And then the second video being the trial of the Axis. I think that those are two pivotal moments in the entire backstory of the whole story of the Odyssey. So once you have those kind of embedded and figured out, and once you understand exactly how the entire scope and the entire arc of the entire story is plays out, I think that these two videos are important to kind of like lay out the groundwork for the entire story, so we can have that in mind and then dive into looking at the trial, which by the way are 12, just like the 12 labors of Hercules, and again like the 12 axes in the previous video that I said, the trial of the axis and so on and so forth. Let's hear some more interpretations, shall we? If you want to find out more about me and my connection to all of these, besides the fact that I'm Hellenese myself, just watch the previous videos because it's going to create a lot of context for what's going to happen, what I'm going to describe in these next videos. I'm going to try to keep these short now and make one video in a series of 12 and just describe each one of these trials in one way or the other. So we're going to start right away with the first one, which is the sack of the Cicones. Now this is, as I call it myself, a trial of comfort. Why? I'll explain at the end of this. Let's have a look at what the story itself says. So the story is right after the fall of Troy, Odysseus and his men leave the battlefield victorious, okay, but instead of sailing straight home to Ithaca, they raid the city of Cicones. They sack the city with ease, take the women, the plunder, the spoils, and then stay to celebrate. Still fully immersed in the familiar comfort of the warrior life, So they're pretty much just like, continuing their same life. They are prolonging the war, okay? It's important that I mention that. They're prolonging the war and what they were actually experiencing during those 10 years of combat and, their deep dive into that experience. They linger too long, reinforcements arrive, and a brutal counterattack follows, and many of Odysseus' men die before they can even escape. That's pretty much it. That's just the story. Yeah, you can say, it's pretty simple. It's a great starting point, though. And I would say it's profoundly symbolic, because, as I call it, it is the trial of comfort. It is the moment that soul claims it's want to go home. It's the moment where we find the obstacle of getting over our comfort zones. Now, I speak of this from experience as well in real life, and if any of you have noticed this, if you haven't, observed in your own life, in the patterns that happen in your own life, pay attention to certain things and certain changes in your life through different periods of your life, as you progressed and as you explored and experienced those events in your life. Pay attention to how sometimes there's like this blocking power of comfort that stops us from doing what we should do. In some cases, this is the procrastination as well, which a lot of creative artists and a lot of more intelligent people sometimes also experience. The reasoning behind that, just look up procrastination and see all the different kind of varying descriptions and and explanations of it, and it'll pretty much make sense. But this isn't a video about procrastination. It's just to get you to understand that at the beginning of a journey, at the beginning of an endeavor, at the beginning of a project, at the beginning of a change in our life, at the beginning of whatever direction we're supposed to manifest and bearing we're supposed to take and start heading to that direction, usually there is a certain amount of, as I would call it, friction because of our comfort zone, and we tend to repeat the things that we've always known before we snap out of it and we actually, start correcting our bearing before we head home. Now, usually this can happen in a lot of ways, and a lot of times it feels as if, you have like this sense of loss and sense of like, your belonging is actually being slowly scraped low. Sometimes you feel as if, your life has been wasted. You're sent for purpose, which, by the way, is one of the things that the shadow governments are using in societies. They try to get rid of the purpose, and that way they actually fill that purpose up with identity politics and other elements and white knight heroisms and all those kind of virtue signaling, so they can actually make them into little pawns and warriors of their own. You create emptiness. So it's like whatever the reason may be, you might be feeling like a certain emptiness, like a certain amount of fulfillment being absent in your life, or whatever the case may be. For different people, it's different situations. In some cases, it's pain. In other people's lives, in other experiences, it's loss. It's the clear, like in this example here, situation where they realize that this way of life is giving them losses. It's creating bad. Like this way of living is creating more harm than it is creating more good. And they just go straight away from their comfort zone of doing what they've always known and experiencing life in the way they've always known. They go into experiencing and continuing that specific road again until they realize or see in action, in first hand, that this is actually causing damage to them. Like the example, where many of his men die before they can even escape. So before we can actually make the decision sometimes to snap out of it, we have to go through certain situations that might, snap us out of it, either through pain, or it could be just internal pain, it could be external, it could be a loss, it could be whatever the case may be. It could be just an epiphany that somebody has. And usually what happens in that moment is that you realize that there needs to be a change from what you're used to doing and to what you want to do. And that's usually in every spiritual ascension or in every spiritual path. If you notice, that's the point and the moment where you change and you say, okay, now I'm going to head into that direction. Like in Tibet, if you want to be a monk, they tell you that you have to make certain choices before you do that. You can't just go straight away and, just be that you have to be prepared to let go of certain things. In Hellas, for example, we have like the saints, kind of like, I don't know what the equivalent is in English. They're kind of like priests, but they're more like they're more like again, they're kind of like the Hellenic monks, Christian Orthodox monks, where they have to swear a life of celibacy and a whole bunch of other things, and they're pretty much like they don't have any belongings. They're pretty much just the rugs on their back, and it's letting go of all these worldly, let's just say, pleasures, or a better word for it, I guess, distractions, you could call it, and ultimately by extension, experiences. All these kind of let go, and they reflect the same kind of path or notion of ascension to the light, where you have to let go of the old life to head forward to, on your journey back to the new life. Now, this is not a statement in any way, shape, or form of my beliefs or anything like that. I actually believe that, if anything, through life itself, we learn a lot of lessons. If you're interested in my personal take, I don't agree with the complete, the solitude of monks and stuff like that. But I guess there are certain souls that I believe it's much more, it's aligned to their personal progression spiritually, and it could be great for them. But what's good for you does not mean it's good for me, and so on and so forth. And once we understand this, we're also much more accepting of different experiences that other people can have in their lives, and follow different paths that could be very revealing or very good to them spiritually or in their own experience of their life. We don't all have to walk the same path in order for us to get the same results. And some people, certain things are just not made for them, and some other people, they have to experience life in a different way. I truly believe that through the experience of life itself, our interactions with other people and all that stuff is where we actually find most of our lessons, if that is of any consolidation. So again, I don't want this to sound preachy as if I'm as if I'm saying that, you have to believe this, you have to believe that. I'm bringing a lot of information here from a lot of different, perspectives and religions and different kind of walks or paths of life, to actually reflect them with each other, and then bring it back to the Odyssey. And I think it's a pretty obvious and easy trial here to pretty much figure it out. Like, you see that they are in that comfort zone, and that's why I personally call it the trial of comfort. It's the point where they have to realize that they need to let go of their old ways, so they can actually finally make a decision of, let's head home. Obviously, if they've been 10 years in war, you'd think the way, like, if you don't know that of the return starting this way, you think to yourself that, like, they couldn't wait to just, once the war is done, to just head home. So once you see this, you're like, why are they still lingering around? That's one of the things that's actually trying to show. And it's the moment where we have to wake up and say, okay, I'm heading in a direction. Not going to be easy. I'm going to have to learn a lot of things along the way, but that's my scope and that's my purpose, and that's where I want to be heading towards. So that's, I think, the first trial that they have to go through, and it's the beginning of a journey. It's making the very first. This can be reflected in everything, like I said before, in life, like a work, like your job, like like a project you want to do, or something you want to create, or a decision you want to make in your life, whatever the case may be. Comfort a lot of times makes us very stagnant and stale, keeps us anchored, and the old habits and the old pleasures, the old identity is pretty much kind of like resonating through us in most of these cases, and not allowing us to move on into something that might actually bring us change. Because clearly what we're trying to do is different, and it is a change, and it is walking in a very different direction, a very different path. So a lot of times our own personality, our own comfort, or our own, you could say to certain degrees also, in some cases, inner demons are holding us at bay and stopping us from actually making the decision, that first decision of actually being like, fuck this, I'm going home. So that's what this first trial is symbolizing. And another little line that I actually added here is the hardest obstacles on the return home are often not the monsters that lie ahead, but our own reluctance to leave the comfort zone of what we were actually used to enjoying and experiencing. And this is true in a lot of cases, And you become, again, stagnant and stale. You stop evolving, you stop moving forward, and that's one of the worst things that you can actually do for yourself in terms of any kind of situation, even if it's not for a spiritual progression, even if it's for business or for whatever the case may be. That stagnation is what's going to stop your evolution in any kind of endeavor, and that's where you have to man up and be like, let's do this. So that's pretty much the first video on the trial of on the first trial, which I call it, again, like my personal interpretation of how I would say it. It's a sack of the Cicones, and I would call it the trial of comfort, or a trial of comfort. Like I said before, I'm going to try to keep these videos rather short, and then go from one to the other, so I can actually piece these together and just have a nice, very enjoyable kind of progression where I don't go into the details talking too much about Nolan's and comparisons and whatnot. I'm going to keep this series clean, get right to each one of these trials, explain it the best I can, give you what the events are, and then give you a description. Some of these might actually be much deeper and might need a larger analysis. Some of these might be a little bit smaller. Like this one here was rather small. A large portion of the video is also the introduction and the outro, as you noticed. So stay tuned for all these videos. I'm going to see if I can, before the film comes out, which is not going to be that hard, honestly, try to do an honest retelling and interpretation of the real Odyssey. And once I'm done with that, I want to come back with certain comparisons and certain comments and statements and phrases that they're actually saying. Not just the people that are defending it and Hollywood and all those articles, but also the Nolanites that are defending this. It's going to be fun times. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all on the next one. Peace be with you.